MHL Podding in the Corner is pleased to bring to you Mike T's World of Beer. All season long, Mike T will bring to you a highly entertaining and informative discussion of various types of beers from around the world. Without any further delay, here's Mike T.
All right. And so this week's segment is the American Pale Ale. And I have one of the representative offerings of that style, the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. I see Jack has that as well. And Dave has what Dave has. It's a Dos Equis with American Pale Ale written on it. Perfectly fine. You do what you need to do. So I think, again, like we started last week, we want to talk a little bit about the history, and then we can talk a little bit about ingredients and flavor profile and whatnot. And so the American Pale Ale is a derivative of the English Pale Ale. And the English Pale Ale is actually a derivative of the English Porter, English Stout. And so if you think about English Porters, English Stouts, way back in the day, we're talking like 1800s, these were big, dark, thick, heavy beers that they were just using the ingredients known to them. And then somebody discovered that if they used a different kind of yeast profile and they lightened up on the grain bill, the malts that were put in, if they did that, they could get a little bit of a cleaner, clearer beer. But even clearer beer, it was still dark. It was not pale like water. It was just a lighter see-through version of the porters and stouts that they had been used to drinking. So that was the English version. Fast forward to, almost 100 years from like, the 1880s to the 1970s, there were American servicemen who were stationed over in England, and they're having, they were used to the American light lagers of the time, the Budweisers, the Strohs, the Falstaffs, and all that. They were used to drinking those, and then they went over to England to serve in the services, and they're having these English pale ales and Scottish ales and whatnot. And they're like, wait, beer can taste different. And so they brought that thought back. They're like, wait, it doesn't have to taste like these light lagers that we're so used to getting. And so two people in particular, Jack McAuliffe, both in California, Jack McAuliffe and Ken Grossman. Jack McAuliffe started a brewery. He was a Navyman. He worked on nuclear subs over in Scotland, and he was drinking these ales, and he had this engineering background. So he comes back to California. Ken Grossman was just this do-it-all kind of guy. He was like the Steve Jobs of the beer world, and he just wanted to learn how to make different beers. And so McAuliffe started a brewery called New Albion. They were up in Northern California. He started brewing this pale ale, and it was one of the, if not considered the first craft beer in the US. Didn't last long, maybe 4 years. He went under, but one of the first people to visit his brewery was Ken Grossman. Ken Grossman then went on to found Sierra Nevada. And Sierra Nevada's staple beer, the pale ale, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. And so Ken was basically saying, we're going to do a nice, clean, crisp ale version of the, it's going to be a little more hop forward and a little more bitter, have a little more like pininess, a little more maybe like some grapefruitiness, citrusy notes to it. And it's gonna differentiate itself from these light lagers that everybody was consuming at the time. And where did he start, Jag? It was up in Chico or Northern California. I can't remember the exact city, but he started up in
Chico.
He started up in that area, and it just took hold. And the difference, like what you're going to see with a pale ale, because everybody talks about IPAs and knows about IPAs or drinks IPAs, but with the pale ale, what we're talking about is a slightly lighter version of the India Pale Ale. And we'll get into India Pale Ales at some point. But the pale ale is going to be, it's going to have notable hop notes. It's going to be a little bit hop forward, but still have a nice malt base to it. So it's nice and balanced. It's going to be lower ABV than a IPA. So probably in the neighborhood of a 5.5 to 6.5 or 5.2 to 6.5 ish ABV. You're going to get some nice malt character to it. Some of them are going to be more malty. Some of them are going to be some of them are going to be a little more hop forward. Some of them are going to be a little more malt forward. But it's going to be clean, refreshing, and a nice dry finish, but also give you those flavor profiles that you want from an IPA, but on a lower dose. So I like, out of the Sierra Nevada, I like it because it gives you like a little bit of piney note, a little bit of grapefruit, and it has a nice dry finish. Incredibly, I think it's like 5.8 maybe. I'll have to look, but it's in the neighborhood of 5.5 to 6%, and it is incredibly refreshing to me. If you go down the coast to Stone, down in San Diego, Stone did a pale ale back. I don't know if they still do it, but did it a pale ale back in the early 2000s. It's a little more hop forward than the Sierra Nevada. You come out, keep coming a little further east. Dale's Pale Ale is a little more malt forward. It's a little darker, has a little more malt character to it, a little bigger body, a little higher ABV. Keep coming further east, you go to excuse me, Great Lakes in San Diego, or Great Lakes in Cleveland. Great Lakes has a even more malty character, malty backbone, still hop character to balance it out. And so you can get variations of that pale ale across the country, and they typically rely on those Northwest hops: Cascade, Citra, Simcoe, Columbus, Chinook. Sorry, Chris, we still haven't talked about Chinook yet, but they rely on those C hops up in the Northwest with a nice 2-row malt base profile, and it gives you like the crackery, slightly biscuity, maybe to some, or depending on what the brand is, you'll get a little bit of like a roasty note to it. And then hops take over, but it's nice, clean, clear, crisp. And it's my favorite beer to drink because you can just do a lot of them. They're really easy to do.
You can abuse them.
Yeah. They're very easy to drink. And it all stemmed from England back in the 1800s, where they were looking for something that was more balanced and more, just again, easier to drink from the porters and stouts back in the day, which were heavier, bigger bodied. They want something medium bodied. And they find this, this yeast profile that cleans out the beer, allows some of that sediment and some of that, some of the color to drop out. And you get this dark amberish kind of color to it. Clean, dry finish, easy to drink. Transfers over to US, and the US typically we just add hops to it to make it more hoppy, because we just think like, hey, it's not going to be beer unless we've got more hops. And you get the American Pale Ale. Again, 5.2%, maybe 6.5%.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it looks like Dave has a question.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I am on the Sierra Nevada website.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about their pale ale.
Yep. I get it all wrong?
No. The alcohol by volume, I assume that's what you mean by ABV.
Correct.
5.6. So you said mid fives, so that's cool. What is the exact hop that they use? I'm testing you.
Cascade.
That is correct.
Cascade. And
This dude knows his beer.
So it's interesting. Before Ken Grossman started Sierra Nevada, Cascade was used barely in any beers at all. There was I think it was called Cluster or Custer. It was a hop that was used in most of the light lagers. When I say light lagers, it doesn't mean like Miller Lite or Busch, but it's like these, super like Miller High Life, regular Budweiser, regular Stroh's, those beers. Those were what are now considered light lagers because they were lighter than the German lagers that we talked about last week. So when Ken Grossman started to use Cascade, which has more of that piney, citrusy character to it, other craft breweries that were coming out at that time, they were like, oh shit, that actually has flavor. That has a profile that I want that's different than these mainstream lagers that we're drinking. So we're going to use Cascade. So Cascade became over time the most used hop in all of American beer. Now, since then, I think it was around 2013 or so, Citra surpassed Cascade because people wanted even more flavor, and Citra provides that more flavor. So Citra surpassed Cascade, but Cascade grew to become one of the most well-used or well-known hops around. And Sierra Nevada basically they fueled that.
Dave Rhodes has another question.
So, Mike, I thought maybe my last question was too easy for you. So let me try this one. On the Sierra Nevada website.
Put your hand down.
I'll lower my hand. What would you say the number of bitterness units are?
The IBUs for Sierra Nevada,
I'm sorry, IBU.
Yeah, the International Bitterness Units, which is a measurement of the bitterness units for beer.
If it's only in America, would it be national bitterness?
No, it's international. It's IBUs, and so it's like you can. We didn't talk about it last week, I don't think, but the IBUs are used for any style of beer. The BJCP beer judge certification process. The BJCP, they basically create the style for each beer style. So they say, here's what, if it's going to be a true American Pale Ale, it needs to be between 5.2% and 6.5%. It needs to be between, 17 IBUs and 25 or 30 IBUs. And I think for Sierra Nevada Pale, it's probably in the neighborhood of 25-ish, maybe 30. Is it 35? Really? 40? 38?
38. Yes, you're right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So just hold on. I got another question.
Yeah.
That's a tough crowd.
What would you say?
That's good. Because I'm going by memory here. It's
no.
I would have said 25 on the base level, probably 40 on the high level.
Don't undersell the segment.
I don't know what IBUs are. So let's say the original gravity.
Put your hand down, please.
Gravity. Damn it. The original gravity and the finishing gravity. Where would you feel that they lay? If you can even get something close, I would be blown away.
So I'd say for the finishing gravity, it's like 1.065-ish.
Wow, you're going three after the decimal point. So Sierra Nevada says it's 2.8, but that's not far off.
Oh, they're using Plato. Okay, they're using Plato, which is a different way to measure it.
I love Plato.
Yeah, so there are two different ways to measure gravity.
Some kids eat Play-Doh, but I don't. I never did that.
No,
Mike gave a
there,
lot of Plato in his day.
there are two ways to measure gravity in a
Yes.
beer, and one is Plato, Plato, and Plato.
The writer.
Yeah, it's I honestly I always use the other measurement, and it's essentially, so if I say 1.065 is the original gravity, so water is 1.000, and so what is it above what? Once you add all that the malt to it, the hop profile to it, so what does it weigh above the weight of water? And that would be, I'd say, 1.065. And so when we're done chatting, I'll look and see what 2.8 Plato equates to, and what I view. I can't remember what they called the other version, but that's essentially that's the way I look at it. Is if water is 1.0, then what does this weigh at the
Mike,
end?
I have that. I've done the calculation for you. 2.68 is 1.0105 gravity.
Okay.
And if you're doing small batches, use something that looks a little like this,
Yeah,
a hydrometer.
a hydrometer,
You
exactly.
drop that in and it floats.
Yep.
And it tells you
Yep.
what
Where it lands, you can do
this
that
one-
reading.
Yeah, this one reads three things. It uses them for wine to see where your sugar content is as you're
Yeah.
fermenting. So
Kip, that thing Jack's holding, have you ever taken that out of a patient who came in your ER?
Anyone ever keistered that?
No, none of those. I do have a question though.
Yeah.
put your
Like,
hand up, please.
Lower your hand.
Wait. Okay, I got it. All right. So if you throw somebody that you think is a witch in the water and they float, is that good or bad? Or,
For the witch or for you?
well, I think for the witch or the
I
person.
honestly would not know. Is there a reason we're talking about witches and
Well,
beer?
you were talking about
Witches fruit?
floating and stuff. I was like, oh,
All right. Hey,
Whole burger.
you're keeping me honest. We're talking witches. We're talking Plato. We're talking gravity. We're talking IBUs. Hey, let's
If a witch floats, she's a witch.
keep it
Yeah,
coming.
she's a witch, yeah. It's a Monty Python sketch.
it's. But is she,
Well, it's not a sketch. That was from
Life of Brian?
yeah, she made of wood, right?
Oh, that's the Holy Grail.
Holy Grail.
It was the Holy Grail, yes, thank you.
And then you have to burn her.
I really like the Holy
Yeah,
Grail.
burn.
I like Life of Brian.
All right, are we done with Mike T's World of Beer for the week?
Please,
I think we're
questions.
done.
I'm looking. I'm like ready to rock.
I gotta save some of these questions for future sessions.
I thought Mike was very knowledgeable and enlightened me a lot.
Well, does everybody, like, when you think about a pale ale, does anybody drink Sierra Nevada? Does anybody like lean towards a
No.
pale ale? Yeah.
No,
What are other famous pale ales?
Well, Great Lakes Burning River,
No.
Dale's
No.
Pale Ale out in Oscar Blues, Dale's Pale Ale.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
all right.
Stone Pale Ale was one of those were gateway craft beers whenever I started to get into the craft beer world. Those were the big four, I'd say: Sierra Nevada Pale, Stone Pale, Dale's Pale, and Burning River.
Okay.
You can find a lot of others. And now, like, even Lustra at Dancing Gnome, which is our flagship, Andrew calls that a pale ale, but it's a hazy pale ale. And so I don't consider it an original. It's not one of the original pale ales because it's more in the hazy, juicy category.
Mike, I'll give you one that got high marks for my son from Scranton. I bought it just because of the cool name, Three Floyd Zombie Dust.
Zombie Dust, great pale ale.
All of the boys at the in Scranton enjoyed it. So
if I recall correctly, I think that is Simcoe heavy, and Simcoe hops, which we talked about, months ago now. They have that candied orange, candied fruit kind of note to it. And so it's a nice tasting beer. I'll have to go back and check my math on that to make sure that it does have Simcoe, but I'm pretty sure Zombie Dust has Simcoe.
Another one on the list was Lagunitas little,
I have my hand up.
Little something.
I have my,
I
I have
do
my
like
hand up.
a little something.
sorry, I'm not finding that hand. You went through your lot of questions already.
You don't even raise your hand?
Dave's hands up. Glenn, you didn't put your hand up. Dave's hands up.
Aren't these parliamentary rules?
Didn't you get enough questions already?
Dave, what can we do for you?
I was gonna ask you what the original average. I forgot what it was called. Never mind.
The original Gravity, the OG.
Yes, that, the gravity of whatever Glenn was talking about. I'm lowering my hand. It doesn't matter. If I remember, I'll put it up again.
Just remember, all right, here's like speaking about original gravity. If we're not talking Plato, we're talking, and again, I need to find the term for the other one. If we're not talking Plato, original gravity is essentially the weight of the beer above water. So if water is 1.000, if you have a beer
Okay.
that is
Hold on.
1.065, it's going to be in the neighborhood of 6% alcohol, and it is, it's 6.5% malt and components above water. So if the higher the gravity, typically the higher the alcohol and the more drunk you're going to get. So that's why a lot of times they talk about high gravity beers. Like you go to a place and they'll say that's a high gravity beer. High gravity beer means more alcohol.
Dave Rhodes has a question.
So when they say original gravity, so just so you know, original gravity for this beer, Sierra Nevada, was 13.3.
That's
How does it get down to 2.8?
it's through the fermentation process. So it starts with all the sugars, and then the yeast is used to ferment the beer, and the yeast eats up all those sugars and creates the alcohol. And so it goes from 13.8 down to 2.8 because the yeast is eating all those sugars to create the alcohol. And so yeast does two things essentially. It creates alcohol and it creates CO2. CO2 is the carbonation, so that's why beer has foam, has the fuzziness, the fizziness.
So Dave, this will be a good example. Actually, this is good science. So when I start with wine and I put this in before I start fermentation, the thing will float, and we're about where my thumb is will be at the top of the wine level. When I'm done fermentation, it'll be about there. So it'll be sitting that much farther down in the wine.
Because the yeast eats those sugars, right?
It takes the density away. Science.
I don't understand what any of you are talking about.
Kip, do you understand? You're a doctor.
Sounds violent.
Yes, yeast, you do not want a yeast infection. It's really, don't get it. Don't go yeast.
This is going to be one hell of an episode.
All right. So that
Wait,
wraps-
hold on.
Oh,
Hold on.
shit.
Hold on.
Kip's part
I
on
have,
this.
I have a question for Kip.
Yes.
The yeast infection, what's the original gravity of those? Hold
you
on,
talking-
lower my hand.
Are you talking about European yeast infections or American yeast
You
infections?
insert it to about there.
Well, this is an American pale ale, so I'm talking about American yeast infections.
So American yeast
I'm
infections.
sorry, it's called AYIs.
Perfect. AYIs are definitely worse than the European, the
Whoa,
EYIs, because
why?
the gravity is so much more intense. It's all about the gravity.
Wait, there's more gravity in America than Europe?
Yes. It's amazing. Most people don't know that little fact. but it is definitely more gravity here in the US. When we go to UK next year, we're going to be floating.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Just
Well,
saying.
then we won't be witches.
That's
Well-
exactly what I was thinking about.
All right,
All right,
didn't
we have all the
expect that to come out of a American Pale Ale
All right.
discussion, but all right.
Thank you, Mike.